The subject of today's episode is humor in business. Alternative titles for this piece could be oil and water, raisins and any baked good, alcohol and social media, or basically any two things that generally don't belong together. There seems to have been a line drawn in the sand, hasn't there? On this side is being serious and businesslike, and on this side is having a sense of humor. Few of the great business moguls appear to have any sense of humor at all, and corporate commercials' general idea of something funny is, shall we say, shockingly horrible or outdated at the very best. On the other hand, the life of a comedian is often not a very profitable one, or are you shocked to learn that open mic nights don't even always pay in free drinks? Many people believe that if they're funny, they won't be taken seriously in business, so let's get to the bottom of this potentially false dichotomy once and for all. But first, why should you give a shit about this anyways?
Why should you give a shit?
As always, here's a barrage of facts. Jennifer Aker and Naomi Bagdanas for Harvard Business Review say, research shows that leaders with any sense of humor are seen as 27% more motivating and admired than those who don't joke around. Their employees are 15% more engaged, and their teams are more than twice as likely to solve a creativity challenge, all of which can translate into improved performance. Well, it's a good thing that I'm not a leader because I don't have to worry about being either motivating or admired. Check and check. But it's clear that used effectively, humor is a powerful tool or weapon. Let's go with weapon. It's more dramatic. I like the feel of that. Joel Stein says of humor in a piece for Stanford, one of the more surprising and effective places for humor is around the negotiations table, where humor can make you more persuasive. In a study by researchers Karen O'Quinn and Joel Aronoff, participants negotiated on the purchase price of a piece of art. When the sellers concluded their final offer with the humorous line, "And I'll throw in my pet frog," participants in the study granted 18% more concessions than in the control condition, thereby demonstrating that you should not run a psych study with 10-year-old boys. Well, sure. And yes, that's all well and good, you might be saying, but I refuse to even joke about parting with my pet frog. Petey has seen me through some rough times, and his psychoactive coating has never failed to make me... So on some level, we know that humor is an effective tool, but why do corporations seem so hesitant to really embrace it? Lee Buchanan says for Inc.com, it is that tension between safety and satire that has traditionally rendered oxymoronic the very notion of corporate comedy. Forward-thinking companies yearn to exploit the genetic links among humor, creativity, and morale, but they cringe at the possibility of lawsuits erupting from an off-color email or the odd Seinfeld reference. Consequently, those hoping to season bland corporate cultures with a dash of levity often gravitate towards the most sanitized options. And boy, doesn't that just ring true. Because here's something truly novel and funny. Why don't we show a commercial where an out-of-shape middle-aged man is watching football while his frustrated but supportive wife rolls her eyes and cleans the kitchen? Now that's sanitized corporate comedy! Super Bowl commercial time! But humor isn't just a tool to lead others, it's also a great way for groups to bond. Humor creates positive feelings among group members by reducing external threats and thereby bonding group members, Francis, 1994. Now that's a study cited by Eric J. Romero and Kevin W. Crewthirds, but can it really help with work? How about this article from Jessica Mesmer Magnus and Chokalingam Vish Westvaran? And okay, hold the phone. Can we not just quickly say that Chokalingam is probably the coolest name I've ever heard? Okay, you agree? Yeah, good. All right, glad we agree on that. Quote, results suggest employee humor is associated with enhanced work performance, satisfaction, work group cohesion, health, and coping effectiveness, as well as decreased burnout, stress, and work withdrawal. Supervisor use of humor is associated with enhanced subordinate work performance, satisfaction, perception of supervisor performance, satisfaction with supervisor, and work group cohesion, as well as reduced work withdrawal. But if our employees don't experience burnout at work, how will we know that they know that they're living in a dystopian hellhole? Corinne Pertil for the New York Times says, levity is a powerful bonding agent. A workplace that embraces laughter is likely one that also encourages the kind of creativity, authenticity, and psychological safety that allows people to perform their best. Humor is a Trojan horse for humanity, and oof, I love that metaphor. Humor is a Trojan horse that lets serious ideas through otherwise impenetrable walls. So case closed, right? Humor is a purely positive force in the workplace. End of story. Let's all be funny. Let's all be more productive and enjoy our work more and be more charismatic and all of those things. Problem solved. But wait, we've got one more quote here. Quote, although humor unifies, it can also divide by creating in and out groups and accentuating power differences, says John C. Meyer, associate professor at the University of Southern Mississippi. If you're not in on the joke, humor doesn't create a connection, it destroys it. The shared laughter of the in-group says, we're cool with each other, but we're not cool with you, because humor is by nature critical of something. It can create a tension actually between separate groups, which is also known as the one and only thing Twitter has ever taught us. But who wrote this piece, you might ask, criticizing humor for fast company? Andrew Tarvin. Well, I got a bone to pick with this guy. As a champion of humor, I will not let its good name be tarnished. Heck, even Viktor Frankl supports humor as a tool in man's search for meaning. What? Oh, Andrew Tarvin is this week's guest? The Andrew Tarvin, otherwise known as Drew Tarvin? You're kidding me. Well, let's get to it then.
I'm Andrew Tarvin, and I beat the often path by creating my own job title, starting my own company, and teaching people how to have more fun at their work, because I believe work isn't just a thing you do for work, but should also be a little bit of fun too.
Welcome to the podcast, Andrew. Today we're going to talk about humor, something that is scientifically defined as making people laugh. I'm just kidding.
You joke, but I have seen humor presentations like that, where it's kind of like, where people are like, that's what people say about my programs. Like, it was great that you actually made us laugh. And it's like, how bad is it if it's a humor presentation and you don't use any of the thing you're talking about the benefits of?
It's like a courtesy laugh that you get. They're like, oh man, finally. But anyway, let's start for real. Okay. So humor, something very important, something you've made it your life. So tell everybody, what's the transition, your career arc? How did you end up where you are, and what do you do?
Well, I started very much on the often path. So I started with a degree in computer science and engineering from The Ohio State University.
The one and only?
And the one and only. I have to say that otherwise they take away my degree. It's crazy. So I started that, and I started working at Procter & Gamble as an IT project manager after I graduated. And that was very in line with my personality assessments from like high school and college, because if you know your personality assessments, I am a type A blue square conscientious INTJ with the sign of Aquarius.
Whoa.
Which means that I am a stubborn, ambitious introvert who likes long walks on the beach by myself.
All we have in common is the N. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. All of those things. It's just the ENFP. But like, if you look at INTJs, if you're in the Star Wars universe, I think that makes you Darth Vader.
Okay.
It makes you kind of an evil mastermind or a nerd, or like an engineering nerd, I think. And so I went engineering nerd, not evil mastermind kind of approach on INTJ. And yeah, so it started at P&G, kind of working this project management role, and kind of thought that was it. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is P&G's global headquarters. So growing up, I knew if you got a job at P&G, you were kind of set for life, with the cost of living in Cincinnati being relatively low, and the compensation and the benefits at P&G being very, very good. And it was like, okay, this is what I'm going to work, my career there. And where the path started to get a little bit shaky, to extend this metaphor a little bit more, is I started doing improv and stand-up in college. Okay. This was kind of that first, like I heard an interesting noise off the beaten path. It was improv and stand-up, and started doing that, and discovered that I really enjoyed it. I was not good at it, but really enjoyed it. And as I started doing improv and stand-up, saw that it was really helping me to do my work better at P&G.
Sure.
It was helping me like with communications and meetings and sending emails that people actually listen to and all this. And, happy to dive deeper into it, but ultimately discovered that improv and humor was helping me. So I wanted to explore that intersection of humor in the workplace, improv in business, happiness and productivity a little bit more. Proclaimed myself the corporate humorist of P&G, started blogging about it, fell in love with that work, started my own company. And now I am, as far as I know, the world's first humor engineer, which is I solve problems using things like humor and improv.
Your story couldn't be more relevant to somebody like me, because this is exactly the struggle that I've had and I've talked about for years and years. Similar story for me, did improv for 6 years, high school and college. You get addicted to that feeling, you get a laugh, and it's just the greatest feeling in the entire world. But then you end up with this tension, as so many of us do, when you get into the corporate world or the serious world. You have to be serious all the time. If you're in business, you've got to be serious all the time. There's no place for jokes. So there's this tension there. I'm very curious how you navigated this. So eventually you left the company. What motivated you to do that?
Well, I mean, I actually really enjoyed my job at P&G, and they were open to the humor that I use. So my first week on the job, my manager told me that it's better to beg for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission at P&G, because they're all about kind of leadership development. It's a promote from within company. And so they have to be good at leadership development because their future CEO is someone who's going kind of through the ranks. And so they have to be like, oh, better be good at, developing our people. And so he told me this, and I will admit, being an engineer, I was kind of like, I wonder if he actually means that, right? Is that just a thing that you say? It sounds nice, better to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. But like, if I test him, does it hold up? So I decided to test him. And that's where I started to bring in some of the humor and the improv. I started to add jokes to the ends of my emails. I started to teach my team members improv exercises. And I did proclaim myself the corporate humorist of P&G. And I kind of thought I would get in trouble for that. I thought that was the one thing that I had to beg for forgiveness for, that, someone from HR or legal would come to me and be like, what are you doing? You can't just create your own job title. Right? You're like, no, that's not what we hired you to do. But no one ever did. People just started referring to me as a corporate humorist. And so I think, to your point, we have this perception that being a professional means that we have to be bland, that we have to be a robot, that we have to be sterile or robotic. And I realized for myself that I could start to incorporate a little bit of humor. And it made my work more fun. And I was more willing to show up to work, and people were more willing to come to my meetings, and they were more likely to respond to my emails. And I remember I would send these jokes at the ends of my status reports, and I got an email back on, like, I would send them out on Monday. And I remember coming in on a Tuesday and I had like a bunch of email replies to one email that I had sent out. And I was like, oh no, did I like say something offensive? Was I wrong about the project status? Did they not like the joke? What was going on? And I had forgotten to include a joke. And so all of the email responses were, where was the joke? I thought you normally included a pun. Are you still doing the puns? What happened to it? That's why I read these emails. And so it told me like, oh no, this joke, this humor that I was adding was setting a certain expectation, but also getting people, I don't know if they actually read the full email, but they at least opened the email and scrolled to the bottom, which is much more you can say than for like a lot of status reports that people just completely like delete and click. And so all of that, discovering that, and then blogging about it internally, the reason why I left was because I was also one of those people that initially thought I couldn't use humor. And I was like, no, there is a benefit to it. Someone needs to tell other people that they can use humor, partially because it's good for them, and partially because I was tired of sitting in boring meetings. I was like, someone needs to teach that person how to make this more engaging so I'm not bored to death while they're talking. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, oh, well, I could be that someone to teach them that. And that started the journey of like, okay, let me train on this idea of humor in the workplace.
And now it's time for a segment we like to call Ask the Streets.
Okay, we're out here on the streets of nature. We're going to ask the question, what is the role of humor in business? Is there a connection there, yes or no?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'd say that, humor is one of those essential ways that we build connection, right, between people, and business is based on nothing if not relationships, right? So humor is one of those ways that we bridge quickly. If we both think the same thing is funny, we establish a bond. But obviously there's a ceiling on that, where it's like, if you don't want to come off as frivolous or silly, right? I mean, like there's a point where too much humor would undermine your credibility, right? So there's a delicate sort of balance there that you'd have to strike. But I think absolutely there's a role for it, and I mean, it quickly, like nothing quickly establishes a rapport or a connection than a shared laugh, right? I mean, that can be the solid footing for a whole relationship to grow, right?
Sounds good. All right, back to the show. You heard it here. And it's interesting that, from afar, it seems like you've racked up a lot of accolades. You've been on local news. You've been on, Forbes. You've been on TED. You've got a lot of these traditional media outlets. How did that happen organically? Were you doing outreach? How did those come about?
It's a great question. And some of it's organic. A lot of it is trying to push. And so you mentioned kind of the books. The first book was 501 Ways. And that came about because it was kind of I love finding when there's a double benefit to things, of which humor is, right? It not only helps you to enjoy your work more, but you become more effective. A book was like, one, people were asking me, okay, humor is, I'm sold on the idea. How do I get started? So I was like, what if I just write a list of 500 ways and then you can pick whichever one you want, right? Create a reference guide. So that was one benefit. And then the other benefit was like, people are like, if you write a book, it makes it easier to get sold into a company because they can say, hey, they literally wrote the book on this thing. Right. Doesn't matter if it's a self-published book, doesn't matter in some ways if it's sold 12 copies or anything, right? It's like, it's the best business card that you'll ever have.
Right.
Aside from now, as a speaker, a good video is probably better than a book, but then a book comes next. And so part of it was, okay, how do I strategically write this book? That was the first time completely self-published. And then it was the second time United States of Laughter came out. I had lived for 18 months as a nomad because I was traveling and speaking. I had left P&G and was traveling a lot. And I was like, do I actually need to pay rent in New York City if I'm not going to live there half of the time? Mm-hmm. And so I ended up going to all 50 states in a year. And it was like, oh, I can turn that into a project. That can now be a book where I talk about, a story from each state. So that's where the United States of Laughter came from. And when that came out, I was like, I feel like this is something that people would find, like local news channels would find interesting. So then I worked with a PR person. I worked with a friend of mine to kind of say, hey, when I'm traveling to a place, can you reach out and share kind of a little bit about my background and who I am? And can you do that? Some of the Forbes one was like, some of them were organic. People saw me at a conference and they happened to write about the conference. Some of them were, I saw someone wrote about humor. So then I reached out to them directly. And I was like, hey, I saw this great article that you had on humor. Here's another angle that you could approach. I'd be happy to write some of the content for you if you think it's a right fit. And then it's like, oh, I just happen to be the expert that they quote in it. So it's a balance of organic and kind of going proactive. But I think that's how it always works. If you're not getting this stuff organically, if it's not coming in by its own on just straight inbound, then do some things to make sure that you're creating, like, don't sit around waiting for it to happen to be like, all right, how do I create, quote unquote, my own luck? Or how do I create some of my own opportunities in these places?
Do you want to improve your public speaking? Do you want to add humor and life to your presentation? Come to Colonel Palmer's School for Humor and Public Speaking. We know how to do it. Always been doing it. We do it all day, making jokes and memorable speeches the old school way. Break it down, y'all. Step on it. Come on back. Get on over now to Colonel Palmer's Speaking and Humor class, where learning is also amusing. So normally I ask what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received, but I think you've given so many good practical tips already. So how about this? What's your favorite joke of all time?
Favorite joke of all time. Can it be my own joke?
It can be any joke.
Can it be my own joke? I would say the joke, the best joke that I've ever written, and I know it's the best joke just because it's been stolen the most, but the best joke I ever wrote, and it's in my first, because people are like, I've seen that joke before, you didn't write it. It's like, well, if you go back and look at it, like it first came from me and then you've seen it elsewhere. But the joke is talking to my boss and he asked, how good are you at PowerPoint? I said, I excel at it. He was like, was that a Microsoft Office pun? I was like, word.
Oh my
Um,
That's
That-
it.
that
That's
is
what breaks the
maybe
internet. I love it.
that's what
The
breaks
internet
the
is
internet.
so random what people pick up and what they don't, isn't it?
It's crazy. And what's crazy to me about that is that, so I posted that to Reddit once, it made the front page, and then people removed my name from it and instead added a stock image of an old dude sitting at a computer. And like, that's the version that blows up. That's the version that's shared by all the meme accounts and all these other players. It's like, why does the old guy have to be? What does the stock image of the old guy help to do? But I don't know. That I think is a joke. But to answer your other question, best piece of advice that I ever received, I think is different than the most impactful advice that I've received. And that most impactful is that better to beg for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. If you listen to the through line, kind of what I've been talking about, is me reaching out, me self-publishing a book, me like, it wasn't waiting around for someone to say, here's this opportunity. It was like, how can I go and do this, right? How can I go and try and do that? So I think for people is, stop waiting for permission, go out and try to do it your self and see what happens.
That's so good. You know, there's a famous part. I do have one tiny last thing. So Jordan Belfort, Wolf of Wall Street, love him or hate him, he's a great con man. He showed up to, I think, dental school. He went somewhere and it was day one of dental school, and the professor says to him, if anybody's here, if you're here to make money, walk out right now because this isn't what we do here. And he walked out. He did. It's not a joke. He literally did. And he's like, fuck that. I'm going to go find money. Yeah. What made you decide I want to be a speaker? I mean, you're introverted, so that's not where you would say that a public speaker would come from. How did you think this is what's right? Was it, I can make a lot of money doing this, or I just love speaking? It just seems so interesting.
It was impact plus narcissism.
Yes.
I think was the like.
That's going to be my new Instagram profile. Impact plus narcissism. Done.
Narcissism. Because you have to, because to do stand-up or to be a speaker, you have to be slightly narcissistic. And a friend of mine in New York City shared it this way. Very, very funny. He's like, stand-up is so interesting because you have to be someone who thinks to yourself, like, you know who's funny? Me. You know who has good thoughts? Me. You know who should hear all of my other thoughts? Everyone else. You, like other people. So you have to like have at least enough of like an inflated ego to say, no, my voice, especially this voice, this nasally voice is worth other people listening to. So slight narcissism. But then impact, as I mentioned, I was pushed into this type of thing and it had such a transformational experience on my life. Even if I had stayed at P&G, improv and stand-up would have been a positive transformation in my life. And so it's like, okay, how can I go and do that? And this I have just found is one of many ways, but maybe one of my favorite ways to get it out there to other people. Same of like doing a podcast. It's like you can have this kind of conversation or writing a book or doing online videos or whatever. It's a way to get that message out there a little bit more and hopefully leave people with a little bit of a smile, leave people with a little bit of a sense of aspiration or a thing where I want people to look at me and be like, wait, if that dude can learn to be funny, anyone can learn to be funny. Like, yes, that should be your lesson, your takeaway from this. And if I can inspire people either because this is great or because they're like, I could do better, that's a win for me.
Well, that's a wonderful words to part with. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you sitting down with me. We've reached the end. So with that, the podcast is officially over. Support him, buy his various books, Humor That Works, The United States of Laughter, 501 Ways to Use Humor, and visit the website, andrewtarvin.com. Is that right?
andrewtarvin.com, or probably most helpful, good starting point is humorthatworks.com. So if you are interested in that idea of humor or kind of what, or even just from a branding perspective to see how has this been positioned or whatever, if you're interested on kind of how the sausage is made side of things, and check out humorthatworks.com. We've got a bunch of free resources there for people. And if you want to connect, I'm always happy to connect on social media. Or if you were like, I love the puns, that was the best part, then just follow me on social media because that's most when I post. So you can follow me at Drew Tarvin, DREWTAR, V as in Victor, IN on social media.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Drew. And with that, the official podcast is done. There you have it, folks. Clearly, that was a very interesting episode for me personally. If you've listened to any of these episodes, you'll know that finding that balance between being serious and being funny is something that is at the heart of a lot of the work that I do, and I can't say that I've exactly figured it out, but I've definitely admired the way that he seems to have, and it gives me hope that we can bring humor into a corporate environment, or that we can still do things that are profitable while bringing humor into it. So I very much enjoyed listening to his story, brought a lot of satisfaction to me personally, so I hope it did the same for you. Again, just quick thing, if you enjoy this show, all I ask is that you subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, rate it 5 stars, write a nice review, leave a nice comment anywhere you find it, and of course, these things grow by you sharing them with somebody who needs to hear it. Just drop the podcast to a friend, to a family member, to anybody at all. Help me grow the show, and I'll really appreciate it. Again, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your time, and I'll see you next week on the Beat the Often Path podcast.